Hey everyone, welcome to some extra content we have for you from the Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers, and today we're joined by a indie dev in our Indie Dev Lounge.
That's right.
So we have Luther Potengi?
Potengi, correct.
Luther Potengi with us today. And Luther comes representing Joy Manufacturing Co., and they are working on a new game called Ambition, a Minuet in Power, which is really exciting. So thank you, Luther, for coming and joining us for our Indie Dev Lounge.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's good to be here. They haven't seen you guys since PAX East.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, right.
I know.
Yeah.
It's been like 10 years, I guess.
That's what it feels like.
Time is meaningless.
It really is.
Everything blurs together. It has been 10 years. It has been 2 days. It has been a month. Who knows?
Yeah. We met Luther at PAX. I think you just kind of came up to us and you're like, hey, come check out my game. So we checked it out. We liked it. We exchanged some information, and we've been in touch here and there. But the game is Ambition, a Minuet in Power.
Before we get into chatting with Luther at length, we want to just remind the audience that an Indie Dev Lounge segment is a sub-series of ours that's extra content that we produce in order to highlight an indie dev and what it's like being an indie developer, what the indie development scene is like, and games that you may or may not have heard about that deserve some love, because there's something to be said about a person who develops games solely for the passion of developing a game versus someone who works for a large company and putting out games because that's what makes money. Because the game industry is a multi-billion-dollar game industry, so there's a lot of money to be had. But for somebody to take a passion project and developing the game fully is something to be respected, to be honest, and it's a honor and a privilege to have these conversations with our indie dev friends, as it were, our partners in crime. Except Zach and I, we don't develop games; we just talk about them.
Well, it's an honor to be here regardless.
Yeah,
we really appreciate it. The floor is yours, Luther. Why don't you give us a story regarding Ambition, a Minuet in Power, and why someone who's listening to this episode should check your game out.
All right, so to give the quick elevator pitch, Ambition, a Minuet in Power is a visual novel set in 18th century Paris where you play as an unmarried woman of fashion seeking to claw her way to the top of society. Get love, get wealth, get power by any means necessary. Just don't get beheaded or assassinated or driven to bankruptcy. It was a really, really wild time to be alive, to be honest, and both really beautiful but not always very fun. And so as for why a person would want to play our game, I guess it's like, are you interested in games that are very story heavy? Are you interested in games that have a major league historical basis and are focused on being well researched and accurate? Are you interested in stuff that captures the feeling of history, as in what would it be like to have actually been a person in these positions? And also, do you like cool romance stories? Do you like a diverse cast? Do you like queer romance options? We've got all of that. So, and we've got a fantastic art style going on. I can best describe it as if the Avatar: The Last Airbender crew was asked to make a Disney movie. That's sort of the style we set on. And our music is both period accurate and utterly spectacular. An original score created by John Robert Matz. And it's really, really cool.
That is exciting, yes. So Zach and I each independently have played portions of this game. We actually didn't get a chance to play it at PAX. There's a lot to do at PAX, and we were very overwhelmed. So I did play a little bit of it during the Steam summer event, and Zach he's played a lot more of it with some preview that Luther gave us ahead of this episode. It's definitely got, it's like a unique setting. It's got some unique characters, and it's got like game mechanics that I wouldn't necessarily think about in regards to like a normal game that I would necessarily play. Like if I'm playing like a traditional like adventure game, you know, you're like thinking about your inventory and stuff like that, which you guys have an inventory, but you have like these like stats of like credibility and stamina that you have to like balance. And I never really thought about credibility as a stat personally. I was like, that's actually really like a fun addition to the game. Like just having like, yeah, like it makes sense for that time period, but I think it's just fun for the game itself is something that you have to kind of balance in.
One of the things I did is, to prepare for this game, I spent a lot of time either reading historical books and watching period pieces set in the era and stuff like that. And one of the most common things that happens of like in period pieces in 18th century Paris is just everyone is lying all the time. And I just like really latched onto that point of like, well, I mean, if that's true, I mean, we've got to represent it somehow. And like, some people become really, really adept liars. So like cultivating that false credibility feels like feels like something we should put into the mechanics.
And I think that was an excellent choice. I definitely 100% agree that is a mechanic that needs to be represented, especially for this time period, which it's a unique, I would say, a time period. I wouldn't necessarily think about this time period being represented in like a video game medium. How did it come to be? Like, how did this time period and this, like, where did it spawn from is like what I'm curious about.
So the original impetus behind all of this was I was drunk with my roommate at the time, and we were watching I believe it's the 1940s version of the Three Musketeers. It has Angela Lansbury in it, Basil Rathbone. It's super campy, but just like super fun, and I really recommend it to anyone. And so we were watching it, and we were thinking like, man, like, the most interesting character in this whole thing is actually the villainess Milady de Winter. Because like the king can just order things to get done, and the musketeers, if they don't like something, they can just put 3 feet of steel through it. But like Milady de Winter is always lying, always scheming, always conniving to get what she wants. So she gets a ton done in the story with very little resources or power compared to everyone else. And we settled on this idea that she was kind of an exemplar, not of hard power like the king or the musketeers, but of soft power. And we started thinking like, okay, but like, has there ever been a game like that? Like, what would that game even look like? And we started tooling around with this idea. And finally, once we had that, like Three Musketeers is, I think, 1600s. And eventually settled on the notion of like, well, what would be the best time to host something like this? And the idea of hosting it in the French Revolution like really came into focus because it was still a time when like social power was super important. Like, it wasn't like a full out war, but it was also a time where the stakes could not be higher. Like, this is like you are about to battle for the soul of a country. And like the consequences for anyone's failure were very fatal. So like so that kind of came together of like, what's the coolest thing? Now what's the highest stakes version of that thing? And that's how we settled in on this.
All good ideas start with a drunk story.
They really do.
More often than not, as it seems.
I've been enjoying the game from what I've played. I love a lot of like the characters in particular. I just encountered Antoine not too long ago, and he's one of my favorite characters so far to encounter.
He is a real guy, by the way.
I'm not
Louis
surprised.
Antoine de Saint-Just is one of those figures from history where if I made him up, people would call bullshit.
Yeah.
They would be like, there's no way. That. I'm like, nah, he actually gets more outrageous as history goes on. Like, look up some of the quotes from the man on Google Images. You'll get some real zingers.
Nice, yeah. Well, that's just one of the things I love is all these characters, some of them being inspired by real people, but they just feel so alive in this game as well. I mean, they feel like real people in terms of their histories, in terms of their character traits, in terms of just the way they talk, in terms of like little things, like if you say something to them, it might set them off in the wrong way, but if you say something else, they'll like it sort of deal. That's one thing I really love so far in terms of the game. And also, like Seth was saying, the whole thing with credibility, but also exhaustion levels, something that I didn't even realize was messing me up at one point was I just didn't rest after going to like 5 parties, and Yvette was just exhausted. She just needed a day off. So.
Yeah, your credibility just starts tanking as you become this barely functional human being. That was somewhat inspired by the GDC and like going out and just like, if you're out every single night, you just start to become a zombie and you cannot function in any conversation. So I was like, okay, well, I feel like that's something everyone has to do. I'm sure you guys felt this at PAX where you're like, you reach a moment of like, if I talk to another human being, I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't.
Those little details I love because, like Seth was saying, it is unique for a game. I mean, I've played some visual novels. I played like Steins Gate, which it's an entirely different sort of visual novel game, but the other games that I've played, they don't take into those type of things always into consideration. They might have like exhaustion levels, but it doesn't seem to play out the same way. So that's just something I think is really awesome about the game.
One thing we were really focused on is the idea that like a game is really in many cases just a series of rules and like logical choices that get made either by a system or by a player. The player has to have meaningful outcome on those decisions for the game to be interesting. But like society and all social stuff has rules. And even if we can't articulate them out loud, we all kind of know them. That's why someone can say something really dumb, and even if you haven't seen the negative reaction yet, everyone in the room, you can feel that tension of everyone going,
yeah.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah.
So like, so we all kind of know the rules more or less. So we wanted to like put in some of those rules into the game so that like you don't necessarily have to teach them all to the player. You can just instinctively look at it and go, oh, that is not the right thing to say right now.
Yes,
not after they just brought up blank. Like I'm not gonna lean in on this right now. So we thought that would be just kind of a fun thing to do. And, helps make the player feel like Yvette, who is this like kind of expert manipulator type character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Though I feel like you develop being an expert manipulator over time. I feel like in the beginning you're a little more naive.
Yeah, I would say unprepared. Yvette was, was good in her small provincial town, but now she has come to the big leagues and it's much bigger than she expected.
Yeah, which I again, that just those type of details I think it's definitely something that makes the game unique to play, but in such a good way.
Thank you. I think that's kind of a universal experience that was easy to draw on. Like we've all had a moment where we've walked into a party or a social event where you have that like double take moment of like, whoa, I do not belong here.
Oh,
and it always leaves such an impact that like if we did that, like it would resonate with people and they go, oh yeah, I remember that time.
So we're all video gamers or have some interest in video games, as it were. What have you, just to get to Luther as a person, what have you been playing recently beyond Ambition?
Okay, so beyond playing Ambition,
which I'm sure you're playing a lot of.
Yes, I don't even know if you can say I'm playing it per se. Like I'm testing it. So like most of my time playing Ambition is me like cracking open the admin tool, like screwing in a bunch of commands and being like, okay, but now if I try the event this way, does it break? It does not. All right, cool. Next, and things like that. But the game I finished up most recently was Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which is really good. Yeah. The game is a masterclass in terms of design restraint. Of like you can almost feel the producer leaning over your shoulder the entire game, being like, okay, so like. Does the character ever pick anything up? Literally never know. Does combat ever expand beyond arena fights? We do not have time for that. And like, just it stays really narrowly focused on what it's good at, and there's something super inspiring about that. Like, and in addition to it just being like a really well-made, very emotional, horrifying game. Like there are some scenes of like pure nightmare fuel in that game where I think the only way they got to that scene was they found someone on the team like, hey, you're like deeply phobic of fire. What is the worst case scenario for you, a person who's deeply afraid of fire? the guy listed out, like, all right, we're putting in the game.
Yeah, right.
Like, loved the game, but a little intense.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's been on my like to playlist for a while, so I'll have to try it. I have an ever evolving and ever incompleted playlist, as it were. That
I think that's pretty true of all of us. I've also been playing Valheim with some friends.
Yes.
I just picked up
a
Valheim.
Saturday. Yeah, we do kind of like a Saturdays only thing. We have an agreement going where none of us will look anything up on the internet. We have to discover everything organically. And that kind of creates a fun feeling of everyone like in the same small group running around, and like, we have a discovery of like, oh my god, I figured out how to make bronze. And like everyone's suddenly clustering up and trying to fix things up. Like, it's a nice experience.
I like that. Yeah.
So you guys represent Joy Manufacturing Co., and you're the developer of Ambition Minuet of Power, and this was your first game that was kickstarted.
Yes, this is our studio's first game, though it's not the first game for us, like as individuals in the
Right.
industry.
Okay.
But this is Joy Manufacturing Co.'s first game.
It's Joy Manufacturing Co.'s flagship title. We funded the game initially on Kickstarter. Back in
2017.
2017. Oh wow! And the original members of the company we were all in the same Dungeons and Dragons group.
Oh,
And
perfect.
our D&D group, it was a 4th ed villains only game where we were, and basically I had been working on the prototype for Ambition in my free time, and like when I would get home from work at a different company, and then I came to that group, and a bunch of us were in between jobs, and I said, hey, here's a prototype of this game I've been talking about. Back then it was very loose. It was like blue squares seducing white squares, and the I don't know if you've ever seen the average game prototype, but it's as ugly as sin. And the endearing in their own way. Either way, I was like, hey, this is the game. Here's where I think it could go. Here's what I think it would take to finish it. And there were 2 people in that group, which would be our art director Alexandria and our lead engineer Mike, who's actually in the room next to me, who basically said like, yeah, I don't really like my current job right now. That sounds way better. Let's do that. And yeah, they were good enough to join this mad quest, and here we are. Like all that time later, we're in beta. I can't say when the release date is, other than soon with the little trademark symbol on it. And
Perfect.
Soon, yeah.
That's good. D&D is a great creative outlet.
Yeah, we had a moment where we realized we've actually spent more time screaming at each other during the course of that D&D game than we did like ever making this game. So like it's really good for like seeing who you communicate well with,
Yeah.
especially in a stressful situation.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I don't know. Are you a fan of like Vampire the Masquerade and the White Wolf stuff as well?
I've played a little bit of it. Yeah, I was in a very good Mortals game for a while, where I played an accountant named Mr. White who did not believe in the supernatural in any way whatsoever. And like that was his whole shtick, is he always kept trying to rationalize everything that was happening.
You could just take that character and go to like a Call of Cthulhu game. We could just go anywhere.
He was like, nope. Like the first time one of our players got attacked by a vampire, I'm like, Jesus, you almost got mugged by those perverts. We have to get out of here.
I feel like role-playing games, though, definitely can show your tolerance level with other people as well, like, and how close you are as friends with them. I played in a live-action role-playing game of Vampire the Masquerade, and I actually had a friend. He wanted to intimidate me. His character wanted to intimidate me with lighting a fire near my face, and he ended up pulling a lighter out and lit it and actually caught like the end of my hair on fire. And this was while we were in like a shouting match with each other, and it was just that afterwards we hugged, and it was just like a really good like connection moment. But I think that role-playing games are really, really good at like allowing you to test boundaries with people, as it were.
It's an exercise in both empathy and vulnerability,
Right.
in which you have to, if you want to role play well, you have to be able to let yourself be a little vulnerable, but you also have to be very very empathetic and understanding of everyone else in the group and being like, whoa, so and so is letting down their boundaries right now. I need to, I need to approach this in we're gonna say a tactful and respectful fashion, even while our characters are doing all sorts of wacky things. Like I think I've definitely been in a role playing moment where there was two of us like, screaming at each other, and there was a moment where we had to do a little bit of a timeout second, like, we're actually like cool though, right? Right? Yeah, okay, we're cool. We're like back to it, and like, everyone's like, all right, I just want to make sure we're all chill about this.
Well, I guess speaking on role playing and other games and such, you told us a bit about where the idea for Ambition came from, but did any other video games or anything else inspire Ambition?
Other video games that became inspiring, I really recommend if you want another game, like a visual novel set in 18th century France, I'd really recommend Aviary Attorney, which is it's like Ace Attorney. They just had a new version that was released on the Nintendo Switch. It's a really well done detective visual novel that takes place in France after the First Revolution. And it's just like super well done, good mysteries, bird puns for days. You are a bird lawyer. The insert your Always Sunny jokes in here. Like other games I found inspiring because I did, I've played a lot of visual novels to get in the good flow. Valhalla, Cyberpunk Bartender Action's really good. Yeah, I recommend Dream Daddies is fantastic.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it is like a genuinely fun, charming, like good romance game. Anyone else who's played that game, Craig for life. So those are other games I have definitely checked out as like inspiration and for Ambition. Otherwise, I'm just like literally have my Steam thing open right now. Like you get all sorts of inspiration from other places. Like I was really inspired actually by of all things the tooltip design in Hades.
Oh, okay.
The Hades does some fantastic tutorializing by just having a super well thought out UI of like it is hard to be confused in Hades because they do such a good job of not through explicit tutorializing but making a UI that draws your eye and always has the ability to explain more if you want it but not like getting in your face about it.
Yeah.
And like, some game types are easier to teach than others. Like you're never going to get into a 4X game that requires no tutorials.
Right.
Like let's be real. Like
Right.
those games need to teach you something. Whereas like Hades, it's actually pretty freaking complex and very high speed. But like, the fact that there are so few tutorials and it still works is just a credit to how good Supergiant are at their craft.
Yeah, and I think it's especially if you, for like specifically Ambition, you guys are dealing with a historical time period which people may not necessarily understand because they may be a fan of video games, they may be fans of visual novels, but they might not be fans of history. So then there may be like things that you need to let alone explain how the mechanics work. You may be also trying to explain like this is how things were back then.
It's been an interesting challenge writing the game is the sort of trying to convey without beating people over the head with it is like what were the social mores of this period? What did people care about? What did they value? There's a lot of you'll find a lot of things like the 18th century, especially the late 18th century, was way more modern than you think. Like in lots of things, but France was in this weird place where like everything was modernizing super duper fast except at the top, which was still stuck in this like feudalist monarchy thing that was like not able to keep up or well manage everything else that was happening, and push was coming to shove, like something's going to break eventually. So like you had like advanced systems of credit, you had global spanning corporations, you have like all of these things that were happening and changing, but it was still all going up to a king whose bloodline was considered pure and blessed by God, and that's why he was in charge. And like that's not gonna work, guys. Like you're gonna like that can't last. Something's going to break.
Yeah, at some point the tide is going to break the wall.
And like especially when people could look directly across the pond and they could go to England, who had had like the Magna Carta since for hundreds of years at this point. Like France's monarchy was considered backwards even by the other monarchies of Europe at this point, where like the idea that nobility did not pay taxes at all was outrageous to everyone else on the continent. But like France still stuck with it because well, I don't know, they did.
And late 18th century America came around.
Yeah, and France had really shot themselves in the foot because 1770s they send off all of these young officers and soldiers to fight in the American Revolution, and they come
Right.
back and they're like, guys, you would not believe what we just saw. It was great. And so like a lot of the early revolutionaries were actually young aristocrats who had just come back and been like, actually, this democracy idea sounded pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
And like not good for everyone who had just set them over and nearly bankrupted France in the process.
And I mean, we should be real. The Americans, like George Washington and the founding fathers, were also young aristocrats that were trying.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
They were just tired of having a big king. They wanted to be their own little kings.
Yeah, and you can see like there are certain American founding fathers who just kind of wanted to be a new aristocracy. In my opinion, mostly Jefferson.
Yeah.
And then of course you had like the real radicals like Tom Paine, who he's my favorite founding father, who is like great dude, founded America's first abolitionist society, like wanted America's religion to be deism, like it had all these really advocated for universal basic income.
Oh, yeah,
like
yeah.
did all these really cool things. He also was so hated by the time he died that like 6 people attended his funeral. That's it. Like such an amazingly well written dude who could not stop pissing people off.
I just like that you have a favorite founding father. That's not one of the core people. I think it's fun when people really appreciate history enough that they are able to have Thomas Paine as their favorite founding father. So I actually Zach kind of pushed ahead, but I wanted to dwell a little bit more on Kickstarter. So I actually internet archived your guys' Kickstarter and went back to the original snapshot of you guys when you were launching it in 2017, and which is how I knew it was 2017. Like I dug around, but what was it like having a successful Kickstarter go through and get the funding that you guys did? Like, was it? I didn't like. Was it down to the wire? Was it easily
It was
surpassed?
extremely down to the wire, and for those who are not aware, Kickstarter's funding method is all or nothing.
Right.
If you do not meet your goal, you do not get anything. And when you're making a Kickstarter campaign, it's like making its own product. Because like that's in many ways what a Kickstarter campaign is. It is a kind of entertainment product that's not necessarily the thing that you're making. And I will say that Kickstarter campaign, like during that 30 days, might have been the hardest I've ever worked in my entire life. Like I worked all day, every day, except for 2 days. One of them was Thanksgiving, and the other one was the day that my girlfriend at the time physically dragged me out of the apartment and forced me to away from my phone to sit down on the beach and play Jenga with one of her friends in the sand, because like other than that all I was doing was working, shaking, and then occasionally drinking whiskey. That's like all I did. It was probably not a healthy place for me to be at. I will not if anyone's looking into running a Kickstarter campaign, like do it, pursue your craft, do your thing, but like know that you're getting into something that's real tough.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's not easy.
I briefly did a Kickstarter campaign back when I was in college for a senior project that we did. I did filmmaking in college, so
cool.
As part of our senior project, we had to fund it out of pocket. Me and my team did a Kickstarter, and it was successful. We didn't ask for too much money, but still, even like even then, it was still like down to the wire, and every moment was just like stress.
Yeah, like when you get those days in the middle of the campaign where no money is coming in at all, and you just kind of stare and feel like an icy hand clutching your heart. It's like,
It's those moments where you're like, oh, I really did pick this, didn't I? Like this.
I did this to myself. And I have no one to blame but myself.
So had a relief moment though. Like it's probably felt really good having the Kickstarter clear.
Yeah, it is like when it clears, it is. yeah, it is a huge moment, and it's always good to remember the fact that the only reason it cleared is because you have great people around you, great people on your team, great friends and family supporting you, and like just I feel very good about the fan base that we've cultivated. The I believe that we have some of the nicest fans in games, and I will fight to defend this. The But yeah, it's like it's been really good and really rewarding. It's one of those things. I'm sure you folks have encountered this on your own, like working on this. Of like, if I had known how hard this was going to be going in, I might not have even started. But like, I'm glad that we done it anyway.
So you said that you had very positive fans and you said the nicest fans in for any game. Do you feel like they're satiated? Do you feel like they're overall happy with how you guys are coming along and your
I
pacing
think
is
people
good?
are overall happy with how we're coming along, and the nice thing is our fans don't seem to be particularly impatient. They want something that's good when it releases. Like it doesn't need to be out tomorrow. It just needs to launch well.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that we're a team that's really focused on doing something like that. We want you only get a one chance to make a first impression, and we want this is not just a first impression of Ambition, it's a first impression of our studio.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
want to make sure that it launches in a way that I'm not suffering under any delusions. I don't think we're gonna launch like Supergiant and be like Bastion, where people are like right out the gate be like, holy shit, what do these people make? Whereas like, by the way, I love Supergiant stuff. I've played all their games, but the Pyre was great, by the way. But the at the same time, I want people able to play our game and say, wow, for a company's first title, this is really good. Like, that's what I'm aiming for. I think that's a good, like, realistic goal to have.
Personally, as a fan of a lot of companies that have at times delayed games or had issues and stuff like that, I mean, my saying has always been I never feel disappointed as a fan, because if it needs to be delayed, it needs to be delayed. I mean, I would rather a game get delayed 99% of the time than released too early.
Absolutely.
I would rather,
Absolutely.
it's art to me. I mean, video games are art, and I would rather art be finished, that's the thing. Like, I would rather art be finished than.
I 100% agree with that. I've been going back and forth with myself with so Baldur's Gate 3 by Larian is in early access and released in early access at like full retail. And I was like, I like Larian. I support them. I think that they do good stuff. I think that I think my hearts of hearts, I think that they're going to bring home a completed, like a good product at the end of it. I kind of wish that they didn't put it into early access though, or did it at a later stage in development, because like I'll like try it. It's also a pretty large game. So it's 60 gigs. I have to keep it installed. I go in, I play for like an hour or two, and I'm like, then I like.
I'm about to say, I think you might want to rip the Band-Aid off and just uninstall it and wait for it to come out. Like, I know it's tempting. It's like having that pack of cigarettes sitting on your nightstand, but like otherwise, if like some people really, really enjoy the early access thing. Some people like seeing a game and like that is in like that very I'm gonna say like that liminal state of it's almost not a game. It's so messed up.
Yeah.
But like like some people really do that very well. But if that's not your speed, don't let you ruin the game for yourself.
It's true. It's true. It's good
advice. There's a million other super cool things out there. It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
It's very true. Now you're with Joy Manufacturing Co., which is a new studio. So what is your particular role with Joy Manufacturing Co.?
So roles I have taken up in this company. One of the things I will tell people is that when you're in indie games, especially starting up, you wear a ton of hats. Because who are we going to push this off to? Who do we have money to pay? The answer is no one. And so so it only comes back down to me. So I am our game designer, I am our writer, I am our community manager, I am our liaison for our publisher, and I'm also our CEO, so I handle all the admin angle for that, which means I do all of the HR stuff, communicating with our accountants, communicating with our lawyers, and y'all saw me at PAX. I have also been our studio's booth babe. You just do any job that needs to get done, and hopefully you have if you're going to start a studio, you need to have the presence of mind to understand what you cannot do for a company. You do not want me elbow deep in the code of this game. I can't, like, I made the prototype, the original. Like, I can code things. They're also massive Turing tar pits that I would not release into anything, so I can do it. I wouldn't, like, I went to art school. I'm a decent artist. Am I a release game quality artist? Absolutely not. No, don't. But I'm also our producer, so like managing milestones and things like that. So, and keeping our Trello board going. But that's pretty much my list of responsibilities right now.
The conductor of the
Uh,
train.
yeah, I am definitely keeping this crazy train barely on the rails. Which is I had a friend who described game development as I don't know if anyone remembers the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but there's this sequence where they're having a sword fight in like a water wheel that's going down a hill, and like game production is, imagine there's only 3/4 of that wheel, and you are constantly prying up the back end of the wheel and then using it to reassemble the front of the wheel so you don't crash, and you're just constantly like desperately keeping this thing going
while you're sword
that
fighting.
is like while someone is trying to stab you. I don't know what the person trying to stab you represents, but otherwise that is the feeling of game development. I'd say like, when you've been in the industry for long enough, if there's a moment of like, I don't even know how games get made at all. It's a miracle, man.
What got you into the wheel? What got you into this?
So the game that made me want to make games was actually I believe MechWarrior 2.
Oh,
Which
okay.
dates back to like that's like the 90s.
Yeah.
And
Great game.
it's the original MechWarrior 2 was a moment where like I was a kid, I was playing it, and I just like I didn't know how games were made. I didn't know what they really were at their mechanical core, but I did play this thing, and for some reason I was just like, but like I want to make this too.
Yeah.
And so like in high school and in college, actually I was a terrible student in both cases, but like in high school I was like up late at night teaching myself how to use game editing tools. I was teaching myself how to use Maya, and that's how I got into art school. Is I showed up with a self-taught digital portfolio. In art school I was originally studying to be an animator, but I eventually settled on game design as my artistic medium of expression. Back in 2008, 2009-ish, that was not necessarily considered art. Had some strong disagreements with my teachers over whether or not that was possible, but I graduated anyway. And then, of course, I graduated directly into the 2009 crash, so everything fell apart. I apparently had a pending job offer at EA that was rescinded because they were crashing. Everything went to pieces. And so it took me a while to get into the industry, around 4 years of like I moved to Boston because there was a founding or nascent industry there. I to try and find work while I was doing data entry for a biopharma company, like just the most menial work you could imagine. Of like take this Excel spreadsheet, make it into a different kind of Excel spreadsheet. Do this for like 9 hours a day while teaching yourself macros to make it faster. And all the while was just like constantly working on side projects in my spare time. Eventually, I ended up pulling up sticks and moving to San Francisco, and I found my way in. My career really started at a company called Kabam, which is a mobile and social games company. I worked on Godfather 5 Families, Dragons of Atlantis as their community manager, eventually bargained my way into being a junior designer, and that's more or less how it all started. Just like, yeah, originally being that guy in the forums telling people to stop posting so many angry things, to trying to convey their feelings to the team and the team's progress to the people, and being semi-successful.
It's so funny though, like being a community manager. Like, so if you think about the different roles now with like different video game companies, the community managers is something that is needed, right? And there's usually forums that are attached to multiple games. The mostly like well known are probably gonna be your MMO community managers because it's like the
Yeah.
huge community that stays around forever and ever and ever and ever. But I bet 100% that your time as a community manager helped with Kickstarter and all of the different comments and all the stuff that fed through. Like,
Yeah, I had a Reddit AMA, and it was weird where I was doing it and like people were pinging me who remembered me from my Kabam days.
Nice.
And they were like, "Holy crap, you're Iron Whale?" And I was like, "Hey, what up?" And it was like this whole thing of like going back and forth, and it was yeah, it was really surreal. I'm like, I didn't think anyone would remember me.
when the world gets just a little smaller, it's really what happens. It
Yeah,
gets smaller,
absolutely.
smaller.
The strangest version of this is I once was waiting in line for a like to get into a nightclub, and the bouncer was playing Dragons of Atlantis on his phone. And I was just kind of like creeping over his shoulder. I'm like, "What server you on?"
You could just get him some stuff, right? To get you in.
I did not, but I really should have. I really should have just cracked open that admin tool, which I always had on my phone, just in case something went hideously wrong.
Yeah.
Like,
Hey, well, tit for tat. You get me in, and I'll get you some currency.
what is power if not something to abuse?
And so then you're primarily self-taught. Well, you went to art school, but
Mhm.
like, and when it came to game design, since you mentioned that like the art school necessarily wasn't 100% supportive of you being a game designer.
Not 100%. Like I had one really great teacher, Heather Kelly, who actually thinks still teaches at CMU's GDC. Which is the grad level program, which is like full on people that can, this is a grad school devoted towards the making of games. And like Heather was probably my most supportive teacher in that regard. She's fantastic. She worked a lot on like stealth games, so like the Splinter Cell series and the
Oh,
Thief
okay.
series,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Oh, nice.
And like that's where I learned things from there. And like I was doing what a lot of other hobbyist folks were doing, like going to game jams where you make a game in 48 hours. Don't know how good it's going to be, but you make one. And like finding game design textbooks like classic Zimmerman stuff like The Art of Play, and just watching tons of YouTube videos. Or I'm sure you folks have done stuff like this where like you just play a game and you sit down with it afterwards, and like maybe sometimes with a piece of paper I'll do this, be like, okay, well, what did it make me feel?
Mm.
Why did it make me feel that? How'd they do that? Like in Senua's Sacrifice, I felt it's like it's really weird. I don't feel like I'm playing as Senua. I feel like I'm playing as like almost like a voyeur. And the way they do that is little techniques like Senua will intentionally never look at the camera while you're playing the game. She will always look away at the last minute, which gives a feeling that she's avoiding your gaze. Or like she will occasionally during the in-game cutscenes will look directly at the camera, and when she talks there it's almost a very confrontational feeling. And like her eyes are a little too wide, her mouth is a little too agape, that gives that feeling of like this person's not okay, something is deeply unsettled within them. And so like, and you combine that with for those who don't know, Senua in the game suffers from some level of schizophrenia and psychopathy. It's one of the best games in the subject. Like they had multiple consulting neurologists on the game to make sure that like this is not just a game about someone who has a mental illness. It's like the mental illness is simply part of her characterization, and they wanted to create it faithfully. It's really cool. It's really neat game. I'm so glad Microsoft picked them up and is going to be giving them real money to fund their sequel. I cannot wait to see what Senua's Saga looks like.
Joy Manufacturing Co. Where did that come from? Like, where did the
Joy Manufacturing Co. came from the idea, actually, that the one of the core things behind Joy Manufacturing Co. is I liked the idea of like back in like 2012, you had tons of indie game companies coming out with these really weird and outrageous names that were fun to remember. Like I'm just gonna make one up, like Unicorn Farts Incorporated or whatever.
Yeah.
And you saw stuff like that. The problem with that is that like yeah, that's cool, it's fun, that's evocative, but like every single corporation, every single company goes through a crisis, like something where things get really bad and you need to come up with like hard solutions and stuff. And it felt like it was going to be very sickening or distasteful to have to like sit down with the investors or with everyone whose future depends on our next decision and be like, all right, everyone, what are we going to do what are we going to sacrifice to save Unicorn Farts Incorporated? Like, yeah, I would have to kick my own ass. So, like, I like the idea of something that was fun, but, and like, got across the concept. What do we do? What is a game? We make programs that make people happy, but could also be abbreviated when you're talking about it in a serious context, which is JMC.
Yeah.
I like the idea of being like, all right, hey, so like, let's go over JMC's tax returns. These are the things we should be thinking about right now. And so like we could be fun and we could be serious. And I'm a big believer in that mentality of we take our work seriously, we don't take ourselves seriously.
I love that story because as an advertiser and a marketer, like branding is so vital to a product. I feel like I actually got into a heated debate once with an old manager of mine where he said, well, you like up and comers, millennials, Gen Zs, you guys don't care about
up and comers, we're like 30 and 40
yeah,
by now.
I know.
It's outrageous.
I know. He was like, you guys, you guys can buy, you don't care about the brand. You guys can buy brandless stuff. You could buy like what doesn't matter anymore. And I was like, that's a lie. That is complete BS. I'm like, branding is the soul of a product. And like a widget is just a widget, right? At the end of the day, the microphone that I use or the cell phone that I use, all of those are at the end of the day just like a product. But I bought those particular products because of the branding and the marketing story that was told for me for those products. Like I use Samsung cell phones because I like the Galaxy and I've always liked the Galaxies. And I have like a Sontronics Podbeam Pro for my microphone because I had a wonderful conversation with the owner and I liked the people that stood behind that product. And so like it's important to have so much thought put into your brand identity that you thought about, like, let's not just do a silly name, let's do a name that's fun, but also when we are going to investors or we're going to publishers, we can have a serious conversation without giggling over like the name every time we say it, which is like 100%. I've got a lot of respect for you because of that. I just think it's like the thought that went into it is it's great, and I like the logo too. It's very like industrial type of like.
It was
feeling.
Actually inspired by old school industrial logos, like logos for the original logo for Ford and for U.S. Steel and things like that.
I love that.
Yeah, we wanted to create something that like. Also, we use a black and white tonality so that we could do color shifted versions of the logo to fit with any product that we make in the future, because we don't know whether or not those colors are going to clash. So by making something that's monochrome, we can adapt it to our situation very easily.
I'm just a big branding nerd. I love packaging and
Thank you. My roommate at the time, who was the one who we had who actually designed our logo and is the one who I had the original drunk conversation at the game about, Dan. He works with Shark Mob, but he's a UI designer by trade.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So he knows. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he's the kind of person who sat down for fun once and did mock-ups that were redos of the Mass Effect 1 UI.
Oh, nice.
Like someone who really cares about his craft.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so being able to have him to look over my stuff and nitpick it properly was always very helpful.
And 100% UI is something that like UI and like branding is something that if somebody doesn't actively think about it, you can screw up on it bad.
Yeah,
and
it's stuff that like when done correctly, no one notices it. When done incorrectly, everyone notices it.
Exactly. It's just one of those things where if all the trains are coming on the station, nobody cares. But
one little mess.
Might I say, Ambition's UI is great.
Thank you.
I love the kind of the mix of both being a useful UI, a UI that is easy to read, easy to understand, but also still having that it's in theme, it feels like it almost reminds me of the very fancy picture frames on a painting from that era.
Yeah, the Rococo era was this very big mindset of less is not more is more, and we figured we needed to capture that in everything. A game that really inspired me in this regard was Persona
Oh
5.
yeah,
Mhm.
okay, I
Like
can see that.
Persona 5's UI is like, very visually different from ours, but it was like clear that the team had a very specific vision for the game, and the UI, every element reflects this. Like I don't know if you've seen this, but for the folks who have Android phones, is someone actually made a downloadable version so that your texting UI can look like the UI from Persona
Oh
5
yeah,
that they
That's
use
nice.
funny.
in the texting screen, and it's gorgeous and cool. And honestly, like I looked at it like this is actually like really good phone UI. Like, did they get someone who used to work for a phone company to do this?
I just feel there's so many games where either the UI is like a last minute thought, or it's not something that they obviously put attention into, and it just like throws you out of the game so much. I mean, one game I'm thinking of off the top of my head, I'm a Sonic the Hedgehog fan.
All right, yeah, I grew up with the Sega
Yeah,
Genesis, so
so
I get it.
That's as do
one
we.
of the most recent Sonic games was Sonic Forces, and the UI, it looks awful. It's just like
Really.
solid colors that just don't look good. It's so much different from the UI I'm used to seeing in a Sonic game, which always feels fun and lighthearted and stuff. It's very flat looking. It just drew me so much. Whenever I see pictures of people playing the game, I'm like, it looks like someone's playing a bad fan game. It doesn't look like an official full budget title from Sega. It looks like someone like pulled this off a Game Jolt sort of deal. But with Ambition, I mean, it gives me feeling of like playing Warcraft 3 or StarCraft 2 or stuff, where the UI almost blends into the story.
We were also inspired by like Diablo. Like,
Yes,
do you remember?
yeah.
Like, I remember the
Oh
old school
yeah.
Diablo UI where you
Hmm.
had like the Baroque gargoyles
Yeah,
Yeah.
holding up your
yeah.
potion
Yeah.
containers to represent your health and mana.
Yeah.
And I just like I'm a huge sucker for stuff
Yeah,
like
it
that,
feels
where
part of
it's
it. It's
like,
so and I
yeah.
love that. I think Ambition does a great job with that. It definitely has that. You can tell it's what it's used for, but also it feels part of the game, and it doesn't feel like it was a last minute thing. It feels like a lot of care and attention was put toward it. That's just me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think these kind of things, like with when you're making games, there's sort of this holistic moment where like just if lots of little things can come together to create a feeling of the word gets thrown around in my opinion too much in games, but like there a feeling of immersion
Okay.
where like you start to
Hmm.
forget the space between yourself and the game because there is this like totality. I'm always a big fan of also Jet Set Radio Future
Yes. Yeah. Great.
has this whole thing going on where it's like Jet Set Radio Future, that is a game that relies so hard on its aesthetic and it's inspiring. Like Jet Set Radio is like, will I ever be as cool as this game? The answer is no. I will never be as cool as Jet Set Radio Future unless I figure out a way to actually grind up a skyscraper. God damn
Yeah.
it!
Yeah.
Like,
Especially with such a small team, I think it's understanding your boundaries as a person as well, and when you need to defer to somebody who you said you like, you have a friend that specializes in UI. You also said that you were an artist. You're not doing the game art,
yeah,
and
I like my our art director Alexandria. She is fantastic, and there are moments where like Alexandria shoots something over to me for me to critique it because I am the as the CEO the final yay or nay person, and there are moments where I'm like, man, I don't even feel qualified to critique this. This is so beyond my personal level. Like, what am I even doing here?
but I think that's an important fact that I think that leads to a good product at the end. Sometimes I feel like, especially when it comes to larger companies, executives and leaders want to say something to say something.
Have you ever heard the goose story from Battle Chess
No,
or
I
the
have.
duck story?
Mm,
So I don't know if you ever remember the old game. It was an animated chess game called Battle Chess, and it was the duck. Sorry. So the lead artist realized that his boss had this obsession where he had to always say something. He always had to correct something, even for but like if you correct something that's already good, you have a stand a good chance of making it worse.
right.
And so he was so fed up with the amount of iterations he was having to do over the queen character that he put in this little duck next to her that was in a spot that would be very easy for him to remove. And so when he presented the character, the guy is like, yeah, no, this all looks really, really good. Just get rid of that duck and we'll be fine. And he's like, cool. And because he had put the duck in as this sacrificial lamb, so because he knew the guy, so it was something that he could focus on. And like, that's really like, it's a fun story. But if someone's in a position where they feel like they need to manage you as a boss in that
Right.
way, then like, you need to look yourself in the mirror and ask, like, what are you even doing, man?
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important for a leader to understand that. So I understand that you guys have a publisher, Iceberg Interactive. I went through their catalog, as it were, and they have a pretty wide breadth of indie games that they've published. Now, how did that whole relationship start with Iceberg, and like how did that evolve?
So when Ambition reached a stage where we felt like we needed a publisher, and like people are gonna wonder why we went to a publisher at all, I'll quickly lay out like I remember I listed all those different jobs that I have. One
That's
job,
right.
the two jobs that I do that none of us have the skill set for is we don't have a marketer and we don't have a PR person and we couldn't afford them. And the thing is, like, we didn't have money for a marketing campaign to be honest. And you can make the best game in the world, but like if no one knows about it,
Yeah.
you've just engaged financial failure. So like and even if you dropped that money to me, like just like mysteriously showed up on my doorstep, I wouldn't know how to spend it. I would waste it, and I don't want to have to learn this on the fly too. So we were reaching out to publishers, and like when I say reaching out to publishers, I mean like I've reached out to over 100 publishers. But pitching a publisher on your game is a long process and pretty involved because it's not just like I want a thing. It's like you have to fit into their schedule. You have to be aligned with each other's needs. I talked with Iceberg on and off quite a bit actually. Like I've met some of their people at various GDCs, and like we eventually like got a really good vibe from them. One of the things you should always do as an indie game person is ask a publisher like, hey, can you put me in contact with someone you worked with in the past so I can chat it out with them? And you have a sidebar conversation that the publisher cannot listen into, and you can have like honest assessment from that person, like
Right.
what went well, what did not go well, what would you trust them with, what would you not trust them with. And like the fruit of that conversation that I had was really good. Like it fit very much within our parameters. Publishers will turn you down for reasons that have nothing to do with your game being bad. It'll be like, wow, I really love this game, but like our slate for that part of the year is full. We just do not have the resources. Or like, we did not have a good year this year. We do not have the money to take on your title. And like, stay in contact with those people. It's a small industry. Like, you might end up working together in the future. And like, most publishers are super nice. Like, I had multiple people run up to us at PAX and who were like, oh, hey, it's great to see you in person. I just wanted to tell you, like, no hard feelings. Like, one of my
That's good.
favorite surprises is that, like, I don't know if you're familiar with, like, Devolver Digital, but,
Yep.
like, Devolver Digital's brand is, like, aggressive sociopathy. And, like, but Devolver Digital as people are, like, could not be nicer and more professional. It's, like, a really funny head switch where you're like, oh, wow, that was, like, that was very timely and to the point of you. Thank you. Like,
The CGB group, we're a big fan of the Devolver Digital people as well.
our composer John actually does a lot of the music for their live trailer
Oh,
thing.
cool.
You know, the Devolver Digital show.
Yeah.
The guy who did a lot of the classical music composition. That's John.
Oh,
Oh,
well,
that's
cool.
cool. Yeah.
He's actually appears in like that in the end segment of their most recent one.
Oh,
John.
that's
He's
fun.
a really fun. Yeah, John's a really fun guy.
So we are the Classic Gaming Brothers, so we like to talk about classic games. Do you remember the first video game that you ever played?
First video game I ever played was Civilization 1.
oh, good game.
It was on a Windows DOS machine. No, actually, no. Let me scroll that back. It wasn't Civ 1. It was the Lost Island of Dr. Brain.
Oh.
Lost Island of Dr. Brain.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
I remember all like the kids in my neighborhood, we would come and we'd sit around and we would play the game collectively as a team because like, we're a bunch of like elementary schoolers. So like they'd be like, oh man, we got to a music puzzle. Well, hey, your mom makes you take piano lessons. What do we do? And we would like as a group brute force these solutions and stuff. We did it all the time. And God, the Lost Island Dr. Brain. That was probably my first game.
And then Civ 1.
Civ 1, Sonic the Hedgehog number 2,
Of course.
and
The best one.
yeah, and like yeah, right. And though I do have a huge soft spot in my heart for Sonic and Knuckles, like especially when you keep using Knuckles to play through Sonic 2 is like such an interesting run. So I guess those would be the classic games. Other games that like really influenced me growing up would be like Fallout 2. Was huge for me. The fact that you could play this really dark and violent RPG that you could still, under the right circumstances, talk your way out of nearly everything. Like you can play a nearly pacifist run of Fallout 2, and that was like blowing my mind as a kid. That like you could even make your way to the final boss and be like, it does not need to end like this. I have learned X, Y, and Z about your plan, and I know it's not actually going to work, and here's why. And like that was really inspiring. It's one of the things that made me fall in love with the idea of games where war is the lose state, where like conflict has gotten too bad, and like now everyone's going to lose something. I think there should be more games like that because I think it's a cool lesson to teach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So for my final question, if you could go back and do it all over again, the same path that you took today to get to where you are, would you do that or would you do anything different?
Ooh, and I get to retain my knowledge from this moment?
Yes.
Or okay, I get to retain my knowledge from this moment. I mean, I'd have to pick the go back and change things option. I don't know what I'd do, but like I have to pick it because as far as I know, no one's ever gotten to do that before. and by its nature, doesn't that mean you have to do it?
It's true. But would you pick different choices through your life, or would you kind of get to where you are the same way?
Yeah, I mean, because it also asks the really interesting question of like time travel is the ultimate coward's weapon. You never have to commit to any decision you make, and what if you get stuck in a loop where you just keep going back because you want to make it perfect, and you damn yourself. Like now I'm gonna be thinking about this one. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does. I think so.
Well, once again, so we had Luther come onto our show from Joy Manufacturing Co. They are working on a game called Ambition, a Minuet in Power, and you can wishlist it on Steam. And any other places?
You can check us out on Steam. You can check us out on itch.io. You can follow Joy Manu Co. on Twitter. We've got a Discord server that you can find your way to via the Steam page. We are on the Humble Games store as well. And I am trying to find as many storefronts to put us on as possible because I think people should be able to buy games wherever it is they want to buy games.
Thank you very much for coming on to the show and having
Please, thanks for having me.
A great conversation with us. We 100% recommend checking out Ambition Minuet of Power. In fact, I will give Luther this promise that I will not request a free copy of the CD key secretly, but I will buy your game when it comes out.
That really means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Luther, we really appreciate you coming on the show. So we will 100% buy your game. So we will put down Ambition and Minuet and Power for at least a 2 for buy. So you guys will at least recoup 2 people's copies.
We'll only need a few thousand more and we'll be good.
Perfect.
Hey, you got to start somewhere.
Exactly. So if everyone listening, tell a couple thousand of your friends to purchase Ambition Minuet of Power. We'll be good, and Luther will be happy, and we'll be happy. Thank you everyone for checking out Classic Gaming Brothers Indie Dev Lounge. Zach, is there anything else that I'm forgetting?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother. Zach.
Zach.
And I'm Seth. We've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. All right.
Oh my gosh. So this is where we generally talk about the cool stuff after.